Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at the Goizueta Business School. Thank you for joining us for Business Over Breakfast. I'm glad to be back from a brief vacation. I actually went to Taos, New Mexico. So if there's anyone in New Mexico out there, I love your state. During the last webinar, the one I missed, we examined the tension between delivering profits and delivering on a higher purpose. For many organizations, that higher purpose translates to enhancing people's lives, to building community, to igniting change. Given the critical role that brands play in influencing cultural change, there's a lot of interest and motivation among business leaders to find opportunities for their brands to advance diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging in their organizations and also in their marketplace actions. It's a challenge, though, to figure out how best to accomplish this, both in terms of actions and practice. It's not necessarily a straightforward thing. There's been some research, proprietary research done called The Voices of Inclusion, led by an academic team from Emory University, Indiana University, and the University of Georgia, which uncovered some clear business practices across 5 dimensions on what it takes to build an inclusive brand. And we're excited today to bring back to Business Over Breakfast Professor Omar Rodríguez, professor in the practice of marketing here at Goizueta. He had a very successful career leading global marketing teams at Coca-Cola before shifting to academia. He's passionate about purpose-driven work, customer experience, growth leadership, social impact, and in fact serves as the academic director of Goizueta Business School's Institute for Business and Society. He's looking forward to having a book published on competing on social impact due out next year with co-author Sundar Bharadwaj, and has been a wonderful thought partner as Executive Education has developed our Growth Leadership Framework and soon to be released Growth Leadership Assessment Tool. So it's always a delight to be working with Omar. Omar's going to be giving you probably about 35-40 minutes or so, sharing the team's research and experience insights. Please post your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many of those as possible. We've reserved some time at the end to answer those questions. A quick plug before I hand things over to Omar. It's sort of time for a last call. It's too early in the morning for a drink here in Atlanta, but it's not too early for those interested in taking one of our MBA level elective courses or our Executive Women Leadership Program. The application windows close next Friday, so you've got a week. So please take a look at those courses. There's some really interesting ones to have, and the women's program is always a delight and really high impact. Omar, I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to you so we can understand how to become an inclusive brand.
Thank you so much, Nicola, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to assume yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, for the next 40 minutes or so, I want to share with you research outcomes of kind of 3 different work streams we've had in close partnership with an organization called Bridge, which is a trade group really focused on advancing the practice of DEI and inclusion in the workplace and in the marketplace. And we've been really fortunate to work with their executive director, Cheryl Daja, and her board. They've been amazing as research partners to help us advance this work. And also very critical to say that this is work I've done in partnership with Professor Dion Nickerson at the University, at Indiana University, Professor Sundar Bharadwaj at University of Georgia, and a research team of both undergraduates and MBA students here at Emory, from computer science to the business school, that has helped us kind of execute some of the work. So it's been a bit of a coalition to have come together to try to understand better what inclusion means to brands, and more importantly, how to become an inclusive brand. And that's the topic of today. Let me jump in and actually ask you to reflect on this. When I use the term becoming an inclusive brand, what does that even mean, right? Like, what does it mean to be an inclusive brand? And it'd be great if you could just put your comments in the chat. I won't be able to read them right now because I'm looking at the screen, but the team is reading them, and I want to actually get a sense of what your thoughts are. I'm going to offer a definition for it, but I start here because it's important to know that the notion of inclusion, as critical as it is, can also be ambiguous and can be understood in many different ways by different people. And one thing that can be helpful to advancing this work is eventually coming to some consensus around what are we talking about? And when we're talking about an inclusive brand, what are some of the characteristics that we should be looking at and looking for? And how do we know when a brand is inclusive or when a brand is not? And to the extent that we can have some objectivity around that and a taxonomy that helps define it, I think we can call that part of progress, right? Up until then, we will be kind of arguing sometimes about different concepts, even before we argue about different actions, okay? So what does it mean to be an inclusive brand? Let me share with you a small example. And I start with a different question. And this one is for, I guess, the man in the room. What makes a good shape? And what I mean by that is, what type of razor have we come to believe is the best razor to give us a good shave in the morning? Those of us that shave our faces, right? And think about that through the lens now of what you see in the marketplace, right? Like, what are the options available in the marketplace? What is the innovation that's done? What are the types of razors that the leading companies promote? Because all of those activities by the leading companies, both their R&D investments and the promotional efforts, are all targeting markets, right? They're targeting their understanding of what it takes to get a good shape. And if we assess the trajectory of innovation of the leading razor company or grooming company in the country, Gillette, there are a couple of things that I want you to notice. The first one is the speed of innovation. And the speed of innovation, I mean, look at how long it took from the second innovation to the third innovation, how long it took from the fourth innovation to the fifth innovation. Now consider how long it took from the seventh to the eighth to the ninth, the ninth to the 10th, right? Like, innovation speeding up. Really important, but not really what I want you to consider right now. The thing I want you to consider is the direction of the innovation, because that is what's telling us what it takes to get a good shape, right? In what direction is this industry moving in terms of the products that they are producing, the features that they are adding? And there is one clear thing that they have been adding since 1998, the number of blades, right? And we went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 blades. I mean, seriously, I've heard rumors of a 6 and a 7, but I don't know if it's real. I think 5 is plenty. Point is, clearly, that is the direction that this market leader has taken. And consider the amount of R&D investment, capital investments required to actually manufacture and produce with that level of precision a razor that has 5 blades, right? That actually cuts close to your skin and doesn't cut you, right? The other thing I want to add to this story is that there are 2 market entries that went in to disrupt this Gillette and Gillette business model, right? Dollar Shave Club and Harris.com. Both of them happened in the mid-2000s, and both of them became very successful, and both of them also use multi-blade razors. So now you have incumbents, leaders, multi-blades, new disruptors coming in, getting funds from investors, right? Arguing that they're going to disrupt the market. And the one feature they kept consistent was multi-blade razor. Is that really what it takes to get a good shave? I guess it is, unless you're one of these consumers.
Well, this is a good thing because you were actually one of the first people to come out with a luxury brand for men of color.
Absolutely.
That involves shaving. So why did you see a need for this?
Yeah, so for 15 years of my life, I couldn't shave. Every single thing that I use, all the mass marketed products didn't work for me. I couldn't use multi-blade razors because they cut the hair beneath my skin. And if you have curly hair, it's just going to grow into your skin.
That's where you get the bumps.
Exactly.
A lot of people have it's because of their hair curls in.
Exactly. So for about 15 years, I had to put a depilatory cream on my face, right? It has all these hazardous chemicals. It stinks up your bathroom, burns
so you
your
mean
face.
like Nair or
Exactly.
like Magic Shave?
Exactly.
My father used to use that all the time.
Exactly.
Smell up the
Yeah,
whole house.
all of our fathers did. Yeah. Yeah. And I did that until I was about, 28, 29 years old, and I got fed up with it. And there needed to be a change. And Bevel was started out of that change.
So necessity was the mother of invention.
Absolutely.
So when you
Absolutely.
told people that you were going to start this line, what did they say exactly?
They thought I was crazy. Being out in Silicon Valley, there are a few folks that really understand the market need, right? The problem that we're solving is a problem that 80% of Black men and women have, and 30% of men and women of other races, right? It's fairly significant. But if you didn't experience it, you didn't experience it. But once we came out with it, it just started to take off, and folks have taken a real liking to it.
Wow. So what sets your products apart from others on the market?
Absolutely. So Bevel is the first and only end-to-end shaving system designed specifically for men with coarse curly hair. It's a 6-piece kit, which includes our single blade, double-edged safety razor, cuts the hair level with your skin instead of beneath it, in one clean cut. We have a priming oil, shaving cream, restoring balm, all of which have proprietary formulations to rid men of these issues. It's clinically proven to work.
So, and reflect on the statements that Tristan Walker made there, as he was explaining the reason for being of Bevel, right? And it starts with a market need. That's important. And it's a market need that has existed for how long? Think about that. For how long has there been men with coarse and curly hair in need of better design shaving products? He launched Bevel in 2012. Why did it take so long? Right? Still, he did it. Very successful. The second thing to consider is that he's speaking about serving the market, right? Serving a market that had been historically underserved, historically underrepresented. And lastly, he did it in a way that generated a sense of equity, respect, even belonging among the people that subscribed to his product and that really eventually became fans of Bevel. Bevel became, and still is, a really, really engaging brand among men with coarse and curly hair, not just Black men, as he says. This is a condition and a need that is shared by men of different races. So it's not just about Black men, even though they are primarily the ones that need this type of product. So when he talks about the need for Bevel, he talks about the business case. And as you saw him express in that video, he talked about the market size and he talked about the unmet need. But he also has frequently talked about the fact that, like in this case, that he deserves not only products that work for him, but a design experience that doesn't make him feel like a second-class citizen. That's the aspect of the brand, that the way you actually serve in the market is actually creating a sense of respect and belonging among the consumers from this community. So Gillette might say, hold on, we had Black men in our advertising. And yes, they did. And they hired Tiger Woods and they had celebrity sponsors. Yes, they did. That's what I call diversity without inclusion. Okay. And because ultimately, the products that you are designing are not the right products. It's not what that community needs. So the fact that you are bringing that community into your advertising, it's really not the behavior of an inclusive brand. The fact that you're bringing it into your R&D process is eventually will make it up into your advertising. So when it comes to defining an inclusive brand, and part part of the reason why I start with this example is because it helps illustrate what we're talking about. It's a brand that serves underrepresented communities, underserved communities through market offerings and actions that enhance the consumer's perceptions of acceptance, belongingness, equity, and respect. Two things there that are really important. And the first one is it serves underrepresented communities. So we'll talk later about some of the challenges of becoming an inclusive brand. And one of them is this sense that to be inclusive, you have to serve everyone. I'll speak some more about that. And I think the focus here is to be inclusive, you have to be intentional about identifying underrepresented communities in your industry, in your category, in your product, in your company, that you can now go ahead and serve, not sell to, but serve. But the distinction is you need to understand their needs, and you may have to adjust your commercial practices, your products, your features, your go-to-market, your pricing. This is end-to-end. This is not about messages of support in Instagram. This is about the way you build a business around serving the needs of different underrepresented communities in the marketplace. It starts there. There is, on top of that, other behaviors and practices and actions that eventually contribute to the end of that statement, which is, in addition to helping you win in the marketplace, help create perceptions of acceptance, belongingness, equity, and respect among your consumer base. That is how we are researching. That's how we define what an inclusive brand is. Okay? So with that definition in mind, imagine there was an Olympics of brand inclusion, and you have to assign the gold medal to a brand. Who would you give it to? And I want to try to look at the chat and see if I can see. I see Nike, yes. I see Coke. I see Dove. Fenty, yes. Walmart, okay. Good. Volvo. Trying not to mention a company you work for, okay? So don't get beyond like companies that you have seen. Emory, there you go. Tesla, okay. Toyota, Target. All right, Paul. You got me. UPS, Patagonia, great list. I'm gonna stay with Paul, okay. If I had to give a gold medal, Target would get one of them. There are a couple of other brands, some of which were in your list, and I'll talk to them in a little bit, that I would give them too. Now, why, right? And I want to talk about the way Target has embedded inclusion, again, in the way they serve the marketplace, not just in the way they sell. And it starts with the products that they carry and that they have designed. Their line Cat and Jack, and some of you may know, designed specifically for basically sensory-friendly clothes, designed for kids with disabilities and autistic kids that have special needs and requirements when they're dressing up or dressing down, that may be particularly sensitive to things that are touching their skin. This line of clothes is designed with them in mind, so that it makes it easier both for them and their parents to go through the process of getting dressed in the morning or actually wearing clothes, etc. That it's one really important signal of a behavior that's consistent with being an inclusive brand. Understanding an underrepresented community, understanding their need and designing for it, right? Now, the way the experience they create in the store, how often do you go to a retail environment or a website for that matter, and you see people with disabilities highlighted as the models of the products that they're selling? That is not the norm. Unfortunately, those important members of our communities are oftentimes not visible in retail environments, even though they are very visible in our lives. And models with plus size models with vitiligo, like Jamel Rodriguez. I remember when I took that picture, I was so amazed by that. I went into the, I guess the underwear section of the women's clothes, and my daughters just ran away. It's like, Dad, this is so embarrassing. But I was fascinated fascinated by that action. And then look in the bottom, how they organize their toys. No longer do they organize their toy assortment by gender. Boy toys and girl toys. That was the norm. That's how I grew up with. That's what all the stores did. But what happens with kids that are non-binary, that do not define themselves that way, right? And the parents that are trying to help them. And what happens when they go to an environment that's binary, but they are not, right? That they don't feel included. Just that small change in their website and in their stores, no longer labeling things in binary ways and letting kids finding joy and fun in whatever way they want, that makes a big difference in creating an inclusive environment. And again, the morals and the diversity that they represent. So across the board, through the products and the customer experience, Target continues to make an effort to be intentional about an inclusive environment to be part of what defines their brand. Now, part of these actions also mean controversy, right? And you guys know that this year, Target faced a boycott because they, among the different products that they carried in their stores in support of Pride Month, included a talk-friendly bathing suit. And there were some sections in our society for whom those type of products represent something that apparently should not be allowed. So Target faced a boycott, as you know, Spotlight did too, for there are other reasons. And the reason I bring it up is because this work of inclusion is not without risks. So part of becoming an inclusive brand is actually understanding how to internalize that risk and how to manage it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well in kind of the process of becoming an inclusive brand. I will say this about risk. There's very little things you do in your business that are riskless. Every time you launch a new product, there's risk of failure, right? The problem with reputational risks like this one is that it hits people personally, right? At sometimes, and it can be hard to manage in the short term. But with a few exceptions, most of the times, where at least with the research we've done, with the companies who have spoken, when they have faced these kinds of controversy, it has been short-lived. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So this kind of brings me to the other thing I want you to reflect on, which is, given that there is risks associated with becoming an inclusive brand, is marketplace inclusion a distraction or a necessity, right? And by the way, let me take a moment here to make a distinction that I should have made at the beginning. All of this work is about how do you become more inclusive in the marketplace. There is tremendous amount of work about how companies become more inclusive in the workplace, right? And there's a lot of effort, and many of you are probably leading those around embedding DEI in company hiring practices, talent development, representation at the board, leadership, promotion, all of that. Critical work. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about when your company, those activities in the marketplace to compete and to win customers, how is inclusion showing up there, right? That's really the scope of this conversation. And the question is inclusion embedded in the demand side of your business? Is it a distraction or a necessity? And here's all I'm going to say about this question, is that in your company, I bet there are people that think both. I have interviewed enough people to know that out there, once we are in an environment of safety, there are many leaders that would say it's a distraction, and it would just evoke criticism, it's too political, and let's just keep it in the workplace. And there are others that say, nope, it's a requirement, it's what Gen Zs or millennials want, and we need to get ahead of it, and we need to do it. So those two perspectives are going to coexist in your organization. And oftentimes, sometimes the people in the top leadership positions are more on the distraction perspective than the necessity perspective. Not always, but often. So how do you actually help them evolve and adjust? It's really important. And I think some of the tools that we have here can be part of that process. So some of the managerial challenges to marketplace inclusion that we have found managers face. The first one is, we have already talked about the risk of negative publicity. And this is real. I don't have to tell you that, you know it, you see it all the time. My point is that risk of negative publicity is not new. There's risk of negative publicity in many things that large firms do, and there are processes to manage it. Stakeholder mapping, scenario planning, prepare responses. The only thing that's different in this case is that it's sometimes harder to know where the negative reaction is going to come from. And therefore, that just requires better stakeholder mapping, more holistic stakeholder mapping that we might do normally. And also, very important that in your process of decision-making, you embed diversity in it. And so that the different perspectives that are required when touching an issue are reflected before you actually touch that issue. I'll give you an example. It's a company, La La Land. It's a Dutch company that produces images of models using AI. And if you look at the bottom of this statement, they claim that their technology is going to help you become more inclusive, more sustainable, and digital-minded brand. And more inclusive because you can generate images of models wearing your clothes or your products with a greater diversity than you could before at the speed, right? That you can do now. So Levi's saw this technology and they announced that they were going to start using it in order to increase the diversity of their models in their websites, and they faced a backlash. Why do you think the backlash might be? They're trying to be more diverse. They're trying to be more inclusive. They're going to now have models, images representing people of many different body types or races. Problem is they're not going to be hiring those people. They're actually going to be generating them via AI. So what happens to real models of people of color and plus size models? What happened to them? So that was the backlash. Now, the question to ask is, why didn't they see that when they were planning? In the process of making some of these announcements and discussions, it is essential to have full diversity, end-to-end diversity in the lenses that are looking, so that those conflicts can be identified ex ante and you can actually preempt them. And that it starts there, right? The other three, I'm going to go pretty quickly through this, is the concern about core markets. And this is another challenge you may hear, that we sell to market A, and if we're trying to be inclusive and add a different community, we might lose share on market A. That we have found through the company has worked with, it's a very real concern, and again, tends to be short-lived, but you need a transition strategy. Third is the myth of serving everyone. I talked about earlier, the myth that by being inclusive, you have to then target everyone, and then what's the sense of strategy, right? It seems like strategy loses meaning if I have to target everyone. That's not the point of being inclusive. Go back to the definition. It's about being intentional of serving the needs of underrepresented communities. Select a specific underrepresented community that is particularly meaningful for your industry and your category. Focus on them, right? It's not necessarily about serving everyone. It's about identifying underrepresented communities that you can serve best today and then expanding over time. And lastly, the potential of higher costs. Well, if we go after underrepresented communities, they tend to be lower populations, they tend to be more expensive, our cost per acquisitions are going to go up. That challenge, you may face that challenge as well. Focus on conversion rates, not just on the cost, because conversion rates tend to improve when you start serving underrepresented communities with better products and better services. So yes, there are challenges, you can manage them. The question is why it matters. When you think about brand inclusion, there's a moral case to be made and a business case to be made. I'm not going to focus so much about the moral case because that's a topic for a separate conversation. I'm going to talk about the business case. We have measured the importance of inclusion on the purchase of consumers of different underrepresented communities and overrepresented communities. And what we have found is that inclusion per se, relative to price and product quality and other features that drive choice, account for about 51% of the decision criteria. Not exclusively, but in combination of other factors. And when you look at the results across different communities based on how historically represented they have been, we have found that even among communities that have historically been overrepresented, like white non-plus consumers, it still matters. 38% of for 38% of the consumers, inclusion was a key driver of choice. And then when you start moving into other communities that have been more historically underrepresented, as you would expect, inclusion goes all the way to now non-binary consumers, where it was 87% of consumer inclusion was a critical driver of choice. So there is an important point to be made about the role it can play in your business, even though that cannot be the only motivation driving your aim towards inclusion. You're probably going to need a business case in order to actually drive the changes we're talking about. Now, how are we doing on inclusion? The question is how we measure objectively inclusion in the marketplace. Just consider for a second, how would you do it? How would you know how inclusive different brands are and in the way they're showing up in the marketplace? The way we decided to do it is by using social media data. So there are, in the social media posts that companies make, they communicate a lot of information about their products, their new lines, their prices, their distribution, and they make choices about how to associate themselves and how to frame themselves. And also all those choices, they are telling us the role that inclusion is playing in the way they're thinking about their marketplace. So it's a good signal. It's maybe not complete, but it's a good signal of the level of inclusion. So we looked at the top 50 brands in the US between June 21 and July 22 across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And we look at skin type using the Fitzpatrick scale, body type, hair type, and physical abilities, to the extent that people featuring in the post had a visible disability or not. And what you're going to see here is a heat map of the incidence, the percentage of posts within that industry, let's say airline, beauty, CPG, fashion, that had people of those particular, in this case, skin types, right? So skin type 1, remember, based on the Fitzpatrick scale, is a lighter skin type color. Skin type 6 is the darkest skin type color. And then you see all the different industries. And what do you notice? I mean, when you quickly look at the results, airline, CPG, 54% of the posts are skin type 1, 24% is skin type 2. The pattern is pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent across all industries. And it's pretty left skewed towards skin type 1 and skin type 2, right? When we look at body type, we see the same thing. Skewed, you could call it a systematic bias across industries towards smaller body types. Systematic bias across all industries amongst hair type 1s, more straight hair. And frankly, when it comes to people with disabilities, they're invisible right now. 99% we were hard pressed to find messages by brands in the top 50 that were inclusive of people with disabilities. So when you look at it across the board, you're basically finding that almost regardless of the industry, there is a bias towards some standards that we believe that would be well served if we were to challenge them, right? And we were to actually embrace a level of representation and inclusion that's more reflective of the populations that we live in the country, which is kind of the question relative to the US population. how is the representation of different consumer types in social media. So that's what I'm showing you now. This is the airline industry. So in the airline industry, you have the US population of white consumers is 61%, according to the 2020 census. The representation in social media of white consumers is 78%. So there is an overrepresentation, right, of almost 20 percentage points. And you have on the right Black consumers, there's an underrepresentation. And I'm going to show you now all industries. And what you will see is that in most industries, that line is the slope is negative. That means that there's an overrepresentation relative to the US population of, in this case, the white population, consumer population, and an underrepresentation of the Black consumer population, with the exception of the beauty industry. In the beauty industry, and to the extent the fashion industry, it's a big change that has happened over the last 5 years, and we see it reflected here, right? The last thing I want to show you is actually a calculation of the diversity index. This is a metric created by economist Edward Simpson back in the 50s. It's used to measure the diversity of populations. It's used by the census to measure the diversity of the US population. Has been used since the year 2000. So we apply the same equation of the Simpson Diversity Index to the population of social media activity by the top 50 US brands to measure the racial diversity of the top 50 brands and compare it to the racial diversity of the US population. And what we find is that the racial diversity of the social media activity of the top 50 brands is 20 points below the racial diversity of the US population on average, right? The last time that the racial diversity of the US population was in the low 40s was in the year 2000. So another way of interpreting this result is that we are in the marketplace 23 years behind in reflecting the diversity of the populations that we're serving, right? We're 23 years behind. And now that varies by brand. We have some brands that are significantly below that 41%, but we do have some brands that are on top. And one that I want to highlight, when we looked at the the diversity index across skin type, body type, hair type, and the average across, the most diverse brand in our study is Dove. So one of you, when I told you who would you give the gold medal to, Nike is very close. Dove came is the top most diverse brand in our data. So I'm going to get now to how do we get better. I told you what it means, serve underrepresented communities in a way that also generates a sense of belonging and respect. I told you there are some challenges along the way, but they're manageable, we believe. We talked about why it matters, and then we talked about where we are. How we get better is this process of assessing the level of inclusion in your company. And no, I'm not talking about the workplace, I'm talking about the marketplace. So I want you to think about brand inclusion almost through a lens of a maturity model, right? Like how developed are you in a journey towards becoming an inclusive brand? This is a process that we created by working in partnership with Bridge and executives from these companies. And we piloted it with Sephora and Campbell's and Condé Nast and Lululemon and others. And we kind of identified the practices that are necessary for you to become an inclusive brand. Right? And the first thing I would say is that there is an evolution. And in your company may be somewhere in one of these 5 levels, right? Level 1 is an environment, it's a company environment where managers see inclusion as a risk. And either it's politically motivated, it introduces more risk than it's worth, and they try to avoid it. Marketplace inclusion, I mean. Workplace inclusion may be going great. Second level is managers see inclusion as important, but more of a workplace issue, not related to their business, not related to how they think about growth. Third level, inclusion as a compliance thing, like, yes, there are some marketplace things we need to do. Maybe we need to make some announcements or contributions during Pride Month or Black History Month. maybe responding to the needs of employees. But that's kind of how we manage inclusion. Level 4 is when you start thinking about inclusion as an advantage, as a way that you can actually compete in the marketplace. And level 5 is actually when you see inclusion beyond advantage, a responsibility that your brand has in the marketplace for not only your company, but maybe intelligent changes in the industry, right? And I'll give you an example. The team at Delta, which is another company that I would give the gold medal to, established this project called Faces of Travel a number of years back in partnership with Adobe. You know, one of the things that they realized is that when you Google travel and you saw images of travel, they were not reflective of the diversity of the population of travelers today. And they look like the travelers of the 1960s, not the travelers of today. So they didn't say, oh, you know, let's just change our website. Let's say, no, let's enable this new phase of travel to become more prevalent across the industry. So they created this body of work of images and videos, and they made them public. And through partnering with Adobe, if you are a creator, if you're doing any website or content on the web digitally that requires travel shots, you can go there and get them for free. That is an example of a team that's thinking of inclusivity beyond being an advantage as a responsibility, right? All working towards systemic brand inclusion, which is, you know, establishing patterns of behavior, policies, practices that become part of the structures of the organization. And this is the framework that we've created for how to become an inclusive brand. It starts with organizational practices. So yes, it starts in the workplace because those are necessary conditions. So think of it as kind of the soil where you're going to be planting your seed of an inclusive brand. If you don't have the right culture and structure in place, if you don't have talent management policies in place, if you don't have governance and accountability and incentives, you know, any work that you're trying to do in the marketplace is going to fall flat quickly. So these things need to be in place. And now, fortunately, many companies have made a lot of progress in these organizational practices. So I would say that in most cases, the environment is ready. The second level of action is around commercial practices. And this is embedding inclusion in your market strategy, on how you think of the market, on how you understand market opportunities, on how you segment the market, on how you target product management, in how do you design new products and how you build new features. And then in your, of course, your performance evaluation, external and internal metrics that help you assess how different historically underrepresented communities are being served. And lastly is engagement practices. So this is how you are showing up in the marketplace through both your content management, your channel management, and your advocacy work. And there's a lot of details to be thought about in each of these broad categories, which we then lay back. Because really, frankly, for progress to happen, you need to go from this, you know, kind of high-level framework. Okay, I have to take action in each of these three areas. What kind of action? So our model allows for companies to get first a general measurement of brand inclusion. We call it a brand inclusion maturity score. I'm giving you here the result of two companies. One, it's early on their journey, 23% maturity score. Another one is at pioneer in the journey, has an 80% maturity score, is the highest in our data set. Very strong inclusive brand. Notice that the balance between organizational practices, commercial practices, and engagement practices is almost equal between the three. They're well balanced. And notice that the space on the right, I'm talking about the blue company, the space between each of the different areas of action is very similar. That means they actually have embedded many of the inclusive practices across organization, commercial, and engagement practices in all the levels that we've identified. When we move to the left, the company and the 23%, notice that the less balance present there, right? So more focus on organizational practices, less on commercial and engagement, more focus on organizational representation, which is great, but very low on target and reporting, very lower on operating environment, and low on brand KPIs or measuring inclusion. So you see, this map begins to give the team clarity about where we are today and what do we need to do in order to become more inclusive. Eventually, we get to this level of detail, which is 84 different practices organized by these three broad categories. And what you see here is kind of the scores of the three brands. So even this retail service brand, that is a very inclusive brand with a maturity score of 80%, they have some areas, some spaces of opportunity, right? And even where they have embedded a lot of the practices already. And look at the beverage brand in the bottom, you see there are still some areas where they have embedded and a lot of opportunities. And you need a map like this in order to determine how you become more inclusive in the next 12 months. Because the process can be complex. So this gives you a sense of what the map, what the choice set is, what are the options available to you, and then determine what are the 3 to 5 things you can do. Maybe staying with the organizational practices, maybe starting to embed some commercial practices before you move into engagement practices, okay? And
Omar, we have lots of questions coming up, so I want to make sure that we've got a little time to answer them for you.
yes, I'm gonna end now by just sharing one last example of what it means to have inclusion as a brand KPI, which is one of the measures in our overall assessment. And here you have the measurement of inclusion across different areas of the business for 2 brands, Athleta and Nike. Each dot represents the perception of inclusion by different consumer communities. The red dots are consumer communities that are from historically underrepresented groups, and the gray dots are consumer communities from historically overrepresented groups. And what I want you to notice is the red dots are always below. And importantly, when it comes to athletic wear, the dot that is the lowest between, even including Nike or Athleta, is body type, particularly consumers with plus size communities. So that becomes kind of the need for that particular industry when it comes to advancing inclusion, being specific. This is what having brand KPIs for inclusion can do. So I'm going to stop there. Define inclusion for what it means for your brand. Assess where you are across the demand chain, not just your communication chain, and use this blueprint like this to create an end-to-end plan. I believe that inclusion should go beyond just being thought of as a responsibility. It's really our legacy. We inherited a marketing system from the 20th century that did not have inclusion in their algorithms. And I think it's our job to change for the better. So I'll stop there. And yes, please, questions.
I think you're single-handedly going to change the way we do marketing, Omar. This was really fascinating. And we've got lots and lots of questions. Let me just start with where's it gone now? One of them, yeah, Dr. Henrietta Johnson, which was my question, was what about age? In your model, you didn't have age in there. Yeah. It's a little sensitive for me at the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is for me too. How about people with bald hair? I mean, we can talk about historically underrepresented communities very broadly. They include all of us. We are all in one way or another, right? And we did measure age in the social media analysis. And so we're planning to incorporate it later. But I think the bigger point here is, when you are thinking about what inclusion means for your brand, start with a long list of all the different underrepresented communities, then focus on the ones where you can make the most difference, right? And I think a challenge might be not to lay out some boundaries and to define inclusion as trying to represent everyone. If you do that, you're not gonna make progress because the list is not gonna end. And actually, your industry and your product may be best suited to represent the needs of some particular underrepresented group. So I go back to the example of Nike and what I wanted to show you. We know it is one of the most inclusive brands out there. We know. But still, when it comes down to plus size body type people in that community, that historically underrepresented community, they're still not at the level they could be. They've made some progress, but they're not. So focus on that, right? And then move to the next.
So Barbara asked, can you talk about the Budweiser boycott? You know, a brand trying to be inclusive and alienated what she presumes is their target market.
Yeah. It helps make very clear what the risks involved are. And I think that I go back to process, right? Ultimately, it goes back to process. And in this decision-making process where we're evaluating that action and you are making choices about when and how and who, first of all, you need to have the different perspectives represented so that those risks can be identified ex ante. They don't catch you by surprise. And second, once you identify the risk through a good stakeholder mapping process, which my colleagues in communications, some of might be in the audience, are the ones I learned from, and through a good stakeholder mapping process, you could proactively go ahead and actually try to mitigate some of the risk. And I go back to the example of there's a program by Coke in the mid-2000s where they changed the color of their cans from red to white in support of the polar bears and creating funds to protect their environment. Well, that program was perceived by some sectors of our political spectrum as being in support of the idea of climate change, which at the time they were challenging as a hoax. And when Coke launched this program, this particular wing of the political sector started kind of revolting against it. Well, it is true that some companies, some stores didn't take the product, and some stores actually kind of boycotted the promotion. But the Coke team knew that risk before they launched it, and they approached these audiences beforehand, particularly the influencers of these audiences, and explained their program. And they mitigated that risk. And it actually became a risk that probably only them and a few people knew. It didn't become a risk that the marketplace knew, right? So I think the process is everything when it comes to managing these risks. But they're there. You can't pretending that you're not going to get criticized is not a strategy. It is
right.
It criticizes you, and how can you respond? That's the new order.
Jacinta asked, do you think the strategy of inclusion that brought about the controversy faced by Target would have been faced by a healthcare service company? And one example she gave was that was done by a company that, say, provides mobile blood draw for inclusiveness. Would the backlash have been the same, or would it have been welcomed by the community because it was it was for healthcare purposes?
It's a good point. I haven't done research in that particular area. My intuition is the same as the person that posted the question, that if the activity is virtuous by itself, right? Blood donations, it's helping during a crisis or a natural disaster, I suspect that the risk may be lower, and that the risk will vary by brand for sure. The larger the brand, the more public the brand, the more risk. But you guys know that, right? Because large brands are used by the smaller groups that want to get their attention as kind of guild speakers, right? So they're going to criticize you if you're large.
Yeah. Gerardo asks an interesting question, I think, about how is the table that you showed tied into the buying power of each group?
Yeah, well, I think that's a separate analysis that needs to happen. But here's a word of caution. And actually, this came up in a number of the interviews that we did with CMOs and CEOs of different companies. And sometimes we can fall into the trap, and I'm not suggesting that the person that asked this question is thinking this. I'm saying we can fall into the trap of associating certain communities with more buying power and other communities with less buying power. And that is problematic at many levels, but specifically if you're talking about finding growth for your brand, you want to avoid that, right? You actually want to look at the marketplace through the lens of needs. And the reality is that there are people that can afford your product, probably of many different types, that come in all races and all weights and all color, but they all share the same need. So I think as long as you can keep focus on that, and then once you're serving, if you're serving a market, I'll give you an example of a company called Sonos. Some of you may know Sonos, one of the companies we studied. And in the interview, one of the managers was reflecting on the fact, I don't understand why is it that our product, which could be used by anybody, it's 98% people of white collar, high income. I don't understand. And that is therefore the result of your own actions, because there's nothing inherent in your product that is not inclusive. Sonos can be used by many people. Why is it that the only people you're attracting are of one type, right? That is actually a mirror back to your team and say, how can we become more inclusive?
So Omar, I was going to give you one more question, but I think we are out of time and this has been fascinating. I am going to, well, first of all, thank you so much. I think we're going to hopefully have an opportunity to read more about this research in your upcoming book. And then I think there's also a paper that you're writing. So anyway, looking forward to learning more. And I'm going to hand over to Pam.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And Omar, thank you so much. And I'd love for you to take just a moment to look through the chat. Lots and lots of excitement and thanks to you for such great insights. Very thought-provoking as always. And we love your energy. We love having you on Business Over Breakfast. Just a very quick look ahead, what to expect from Business Over Breakfast in the coming few weeks. On August 3rd, Donna Peters is going to join us for a session on surrounding yourself with career options. And it's not just about the role. She has a multi-pronged approach for you to be thinking about to give yourself options. Next, on August the 17th, is designing your ideal life, mastering finances for a fulfilling future, giving you options, also connected to career. So you'll have to join us to learn about how. And then on September 3rd, we'll be welcoming Catherine McConnell back to talk with us about negotiation strategies. And as Nicola mentioned at the front end of our call, registration and applications are closing next Friday. So if you are interested in our MBA level credit giving courses, if you will, our extended learning courses, or our executive women's leadership program, both of those applications close next Friday. And coming up this fall are some new short courses. Check all of these out online if you are interested, featuring especially our negotiations and influence, as well as our executive communications and leadership practices. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you are going to enjoy the last bits of summer as school starts in early August. I can't believe this summertime is passing so quickly. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next month for Business Over Breakfast.